Hello, everybody. Welcome to week 7. Weather's getting a little bit chilly outside, but that's fine. We've got the holidays coming up, and that means that the semester is moving forward. So, anyway, all right. Next week we have our midterm, so 1 week from today. I'll make sure to put up some review material for you guys. I think I have it set up in Scholar to where you can review your quizzes, so go ahead and that's something that you're definitely going to want to do to prepare for the midterm. The questions won't be identical, but if you understand the questions on the quiz, you should be able to answer the similar questions that will be on the midterm. And then, as I said, you're going to have to do some short answer questions, and I will make sure to post a list of topics that I think that you should be able to talk about on your midterm exam, and if you can do that, then you should be in good shape. Okay, so last week we looked at Kant, and I know a lot of people said Kant is not easy, and we read, Kant simplified. So you can imagine trying to work through Kant himself. Especially when he's in, some of this stuff, he's really challenging. But I wanted to talk about a few things in regards to Kant before we move on to Rawls this week. And the thing we were looking at last week was Kant's categorical imperative. And Kant is sort of the father of what is known as deontological moral reasoning, or categorical moral reasoning it's called. And essentially that's a type of reasoning that posits that there exist such things as natural or universal rules regarding human behavior that don't take into account the consequences. They don't make their decisions based on the consequences. And that's what led Kant to develop the categorical imperative in the first place. He was not happy with a lot of the ethical systems that were out there because he believed that they were all hypothetical, or that they depended on the consequences, like consequentialism. Consequentialism is an if-then statement. It's not categorical. It's hypothetical because it says if you want to maximize happiness or if you want to maximize pleasure, then this is how you act. That's hypothetical. It's not categorical. And Kant talks about, we didn't read about this, but Kant talks about hypothetical imperatives in the groundwork for the metaphysics of morals. And for Kant, a hypothetical imperative is just that. It's an if-then statement. If you're thirsty, you should drink some water. That's hypothetical. And the opposite of that is what Kant calls the categorical imperative. And the categorical imperative means that that's the way that you should behave, not hypothetically, universally in all situations. That's categorically the right thing to do. Now the problem with that is you have to find a foundation to base a categorical statement on. If you're going to say that it's categorically wrong to murder other people, you have to have a foundation for that. You can't just posit that and say, well, this is the way that it is, because obviously people can point to examples and say, well, it doesn't appear to be that way in this particular situation. So the way that Kant goes about trying to ground his categorical reasoning is through rationality. He claims that the thing that makes human beings special and deserving of categorical moral respect or categorical moral behavior is rationality. And if something has rationality, then you absolutely have to respect that. And that's the whole thing when it comes down to this idea of using someone as a mere means to an end instead of just viewing them as an end in themselves. The reason that human beings should be viewed as ends in themselves is that they have something called an autonomous will, which means that human beings have the capacity to determine sort of to make up their own mind. They don't act by reflex, they don't act by instinct. Human beings are capable of deliberating and coming to their own conclusions. So because that's the case, you don't have the right to make those deliberations and conclusions for them. And that is essentially the foundation for the categorical imperative. Kant has 3 formulations of it. The first formulation is that if you want something to be a categorical imperative, you have to be willing to say that that particular action or that particular deliberation should be able to be made into a universal law. So for instance, if we want to say that lying is wrong, if I want to say that lying is categorically wrong, I have to be willing to say that lying is wrong in every particular situation. And Kant was willing to say that. And we looked at several counterexamples, and I'll talk about those in a bit. But the reason that Kant said that it's okay for lying to be universally wrong is he thinks that there are certain behaviors that, if they were made into a universal law, would result in the disintegration of human society. So, for instance, if we say that we can't will that lying is the right thing to do universally. If we say that lying is the right thing to do universally, even by saying that, we're already contradicting ourselves, right? Because essentially what we're doing is we're setting up a situation where I say, well, lying is universally right. That statement itself, lying universally right, could be a lie, or should be a lie even. So there's a type of contradiction that's inherent in saying that lying should be universally right. Whereas a statement like saying lying is universally wrong, it appears that if that principle is carried out to its logical conclusions, then you're going to have a fully functioning society. So when you're thinking about categorical imperatives, at least in the first formulation, you should be thinking about, okay, if I want to say that this is categorically wrong, I have to be willing to say that it could become a universal law, and that can't result in any sort of contradictions like saying that lying is universally right. So that's the first formulation. Then we already talked about the third one a bit, and the second one's quite similar, and it's just saying that human beings, because they are rational actors, should be treated as such. They should be treated as they have the ability to make their own deliberations, and it's immoral for you to make deliberations for that person. So when you're thinking about a categorical imperative, you ask yourself, in this particular situation, am I going to be using this person as a mere means to an end and not as an end in and of themselves? If that is the case, then it's categorically wrong to do so. Okay, another thing was this idea of, and this is important as well, and O'Neill talks about this in her paper, it's okay to use people as means to an end. We do it all the time. I think one student brought up, the example of a waitress. Another student brought up an example of living in a democratic society. We've sort of willingly said, okay, well, we're going to put ourselves in these relationships of, the bank teller and the person. If you want to get your money out, you have to use the bank teller as a means to do that. If you want to get food, you have to use your waitress as a means to do that. But the key aspect of these particular situations is that the bank teller, the waitress, citizens in a democratic society have that's a more problematic topic, and we can talk about that some more. But the theory goes that citizens in a democratic society have entered into a social contract, and they're willingly saying, yeah, I'm willing to give up some of my autonomy in order to make society work. So you're being used as a means to an end in that case, sure. Just like you're being used as a means to an end if you're a bank teller or a waitress. But you've entered into that situation, contract, willingly, and you have used your rational capacities to enter into that contract. So Kant is fine with that. It's the situation where somebody is being manipulated against their will, or somebody's being deceived against their will, that Kant has a problem with, because you're not respecting that person's rationality and their capacity to be an autonomous agent. Another thing is, and this came up in one of the discussions as well, is the distinction between perfect and imperfect duties. Kant recognizes that oftentimes there are conflicts in our duties. And the way Kant goes about resolving this, and I think somebody had mentioned, the duty that one has to one's family or the duty that one has to one's friends versus the categorical duties that one has. So a perfect duty for Kant is something that relates to the categorical imperative. A perfect duty would be, if you can will that it's universally wrong to lie, you have a perfect duty not to lie. Whereas an imperfect duty would be something like, I have a duty to respect my friends. I have a duty to protect my family. Those are imperfect duties. And for Kant, he says that whenever a perfect duty is in contradiction with an imperfect duty, then you have a responsibility to follow the perfect duty. And Kant also argues that you're never going to be in a situation where perfect duties are in conflict with one another. That's not the way that it works. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but that's Kant's stance. So we'll go with that. Okay, the Golden Rule. That was, a lot of people said this is very reminiscent of the Golden Rule, and people have been saying that throughout the years. So I thought maybe we could talk a little bit about